It's 12 o'clock noon in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, according to my computer. So this is the opportunity for me to say that this is Steve Larson of the editorial staff up here at Forage Dairyman, welcoming all of you to this webinar. We're looking forward to a great presentation on diagnosing some ration delivery problems and other issues, with Kuhn being the sponsor of today's webinar, with Bill Stone from Diamond V being the presenter. Just a note, you feel free to download the handouts if you have an interest in a capability of doing that. And feel free to ask any questions as we go along during the webinar by submitting them, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end. And now it's my opportunity to turn control over to Mike Hutchins from the University of Illinois, our co-host for the series, to introduce our speaker today and get us rolling. Mike?
Very good, Steve. Thanks very much. And it is my honor and pleasure to introduce a good friend and professional co-worker, Dr. Bill Stone. Dr. Stone grew up on a farm in Wisconsin and got his DVM degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and then practiced for 3 years in southern Wisconsin. He then went to Cornell to get his PhD degree in an applied area of dairy nutrition and management. And then after completing that PhD degree, he operated a nutritional management consulting service in central New York. And then he worked for 9 years with the very well-known Pro Dairy program out of New York State, which really works with dairy farmers for 9 years. And then he joined the Diamond V Group in his current position as Technical Service Director in Field Services with Diamond V. So, Dr. Bill Stone, it's a pleasure to have you online, and we will turn the program over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hutchins, and thank you, Forage Dairyman, for having me here today. I'm very happy, very honored to get to share this information that I think is important for you guys to be doing out there. So what I want to talk about today is just different things that can influence the ration. And I've got brought up here, my ration isn't working. And I was thinking about this, and I'd have friends and colleagues, they'd be saying right now, Bill's the perfect person to be giving this presentation, because so many times his ration hasn't worked. And you know, you're right. There is truth there. And when that happens, we got to dig into things, and we got to try to find out some reasons that potentially beyond the paper ration that it's not working. And that's what I want to think about with you here today. So again, my ration isn't working. That can lead to all sorts of problems, things we don't want to have happening on our dairy farm. It could be more transition cow health problems, so more ketosis, more DAs, more metritis than we want, our herd maybe not making as much milk, potentially low milk fat. And boy, it's a bad time to have low milk fat with it in the US at $3 per pound. That's what's bringing home some money right now. So we want to make sure we don't have that going on. We could have health problems like indigestion or gastrointestinal issues, laminitis, subacute rumen acidosis. And again, there's a lot of things, a lot of areas on our dairy where management approaches can influence these different problems. What I want you to be thinking about is different protocols that you should have in place that will help your dairy to reduce the risk of these and other nutritionally related problems. And that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be going through some different things that hopefully you already have going on your dairy. If you don't, there's some things that I would like you to get started. So these are the different areas that we'll be discussing today in terms of getting more out of your ration. Know what you have. We'll go through silage management, best way to prep forages, just some thoughts on monitoring, adjusting dry matters, how much should I feed and pen counts, delivering that TMR, preventing sorting, having just the right body condition score at freshening, and with all of our best efforts that we try to do on our dairy, making sure that we're not bringing in any potential harm to our cows as well. So first of all, know what you have. What I mean by that is forages, of course, make up a huge portion of our diet, hopefully over 50% on probably all of our dairies. And what I often see is a cutting of haylage will be opened, or we're going into new corn silage, and we don't know what's ahead of us. We have an idea. Maybe first cutting went in a bit late, and we're thinking it might not be quite as good as what I wanted. Maybe third cutting went right in at the scheduled interval, but we don't really know. And it remains a bit of a mystery until we really get into that pile. What's much better is to know ahead of time what that nutritionist has to work with, and that individual can then think through what different cuttings of haylage, for example, might work together better, or how should I be utilizing or thinking about corn silage, or what might supplement these forages better. So knowing things ahead of time is really where we want to be. So here we see some big square bales coming in, and this guy is going through with a moisture tester. He's testing these bales. Any bales that aren't where he wants them to be, they're going into one section, and desired bales going into another. That's a good first step there. And of course, then those bales are going to be tested more after this and find out what these lots of hay really are like. This is the Western US dairy, and they've got forage stored here in bags. And just take a look here. You can see this first cutting here, alfalfa in bag 2, and when it was cut. And you see along these bags here, there's lines. You can see them a little bit better over here. These lines that are drawn, those are different loads of feed. These loads of feeds have been sampled. They've been checked for dry matter. It's about every 10 loads is compiled, and there's an analysis done. This is all in a spreadsheet. And so they're feeding out of this bag, and they have such a great idea of what is coming up here that there's not a surprise. And again, that's how we can best get the most out of our forages, how we can get the most production and best health for our cows. We know what's coming. We don't have any surprises there. So once it's in the pile, you've got it's a bit of an issue. I've got a really kind of a neat forage drilling tool where I can drill from the top of a bunker silo and get a bore sample of that bunker. The problem is, man, that's a lot of work. You're cranking this thing and getting it down there. So it's a lot of work, and it doesn't get done as often as maybe it potentially could in that situation. And with that, then there's fewer locations that are tested. A better approach is, let's say we're filling that bunker silo, and we've got multiple drivers bringing in and dumping loads of feed. We could have one driver who's going to walk around. Let's say here's our pile of feed. He's going to walk around that pile of feed. He's going to grab samples from all around that pile, and he's doing that throughout the day, subsampling these loads. That goes into a cool, dry place. At the end of the day, all those samples are composited, and that's what was delivered to that bunker that day. We can submit those samples in and have a good idea where we're at in terms of dry matter, fiber, protein levels, or starch if it's corn silage, NDF digestibilities, and again, we've got an excellent idea of where we're at for those forages. Probably the next step up here would have the in-field NR measurements on our chopper. And of course, we can start with dry matter, and then we can go beyond that to fiber or even starch levels in our corn silages and have a good idea of that way. Another thing I like about this one is, with these NIR sensors, is if we have a whole field, or let's say it's a section of a corn silage pile that is out of limits, but we don't want to feed it to our lactating cows, and if we have the potential in our bunkers to be storing that separately, we can do that. So we can be targeting these feeds that don't meet the nutrients we want for our lactating cows for other groups, for example, the bred heifers, and basically target the best feeds for our lactating cows. Another thing we want to do, we don't want to be surprised when we open that bunker, is to be monitoring how well kernels are being processed when corn silage is being harvested. And probably the easiest way is the one that's recommended by Pioneer, or freshly chopped corn silage test. And that simply involves taking about a quart of corn silage. We're going to dump that into a 5-gallon bucket. We're going to add enough water so we've got all of that corn silage suspended. We're going to swish it around with our hand, discard the water and the floating particles, and what remains is that nice heavy starch that's sunk to the bottom of that bucket. So we dump that out onto a clean area, spread those kernels out, and we're evaluating those kernels now. We don't want to see more than about 2 or 3 kernels that aren't broken. We hopefully want them to be well broken. That increases that starch availability so that cow will be able to get more out of that valuable starch. Again, we want to be doing this obviously when we're harvesting. We don't want to be surprised when we open that bunker or when we're feeding that out. The corn silage processing score is an excellent test, and we can do that when we're feeding it out to monitor how good of a job we did. But again, the process is done, so that's not going to change anything. Okay, silage management, very important area. And again, our forages make up a huge part of our diet. We're going to have protocols in place that if there is any spoiled silage, we're going to get it out of there. We're going to keep that leading edge of plastic well weighted down and remove it as often as necessary to keep ahead of any top spoilage. We want a vertical, smooth, tight silage face. And of course, we want to be feeding out enough to avoid any heating in that silage face. So let's dig into this a little bit more here then. I like to show feeders bunker silos where things are really being done well. And the reason for that is a lot of feeders don't get to other silos. And what they see on their operation is often what they think, basically that's the way it is, and that's how it should be. But that's not always the case. So it's good to either take them to other dairies where things are being done really well, or show them some pictures. This is a dairy near Watertown, New York, doing a great job with their corn silage here. You can see where there's a little bit of spoilage. You can see right there underneath the plastic. That spoilage that's going to be in this feed out area, it's been removed. This leading edge of plastic is kept well weighted down with tires. That's important because we don't want air infiltrating back underneath this plastic and causing spoilage before we get to that feed out area. You see this nice, straight, intact face where the defacer has been properly used. Everything's been scraped up here along the bottom, and we'll talk about getting that ready for feeding in just a minute here. This is high moisture corn. Hard to have that plastic much closer to the edge than what it is, and obviously they got to roll that back some before they go to feed next time. Added little protection. You look closely, you see a little fence back here. That's to keep deer from walking up onto top of this high moisture corn and having their fill of it. Another gold standard picture shots here, the top of a corn silage bunker. Now look at this one over here. These nice gravel-filled silage bags are great because they don't blow away. Hurricane Irma, you'd have a hard time moving that thing. So this is well held down here. And we see silo stop here, another layer of double layer plastic on top of that. Again, no air is getting back here. We're going to have good feed when we start to roll back that plastic. Here's some things that aren't so good. And to me, the part that's really interesting is that generally the dairy management doesn't have any idea that this is going on. This is on top of the bunker. The only way you see this is when you get on top of the bunker. So we have a lot of spoilage in both of these pictures. All of this spoilage is going right to the lactating cows. When that spoiled feed hits the rumen, those rumen microbes, not only is this stuff not as digestible, of course, but it also hurts that normal fermentation. So now that fermentation process isn't occurring the way that we want it to in the rumen. Those rumen microbes can't get as much out of the feedstuffs as they could have otherwise, and we're going to suffer from that. I like to use this nice big thermometer of mine and check out the temperature of this forage at the top of the bunkers. And this is the same bunker silo. This is the temperature right underneath the plastic. It's about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And here's right at the edge that's being fed, 105 degrees. Okay, that's an example of a dairy that's doing a great job back here. They've got good feed underneath that plastic, but they're rolling this plastic back. They're leaving it exposed too long, this top surface of feed here, and it is spoiling. We don't want that to happen. Another dairy here, same thing. They take the plastic back too far ahead of time. There's lots of spoilage that's occurring here in their haylage and in their corn silage. Notice this is the feed out edge right here. Same thing was right here. This spoilage is going to the cows. And of course, we don't want that to happen. Here's an example of it. This is corn silage. It's been defaced. It's been put into a pile. See these big blobs of mold and spoilage there? Well, that's in our feed out pile. That's going to our lactating cows. And again, we don't want that to happen. Here's a feed out face here. This is some more mature grass haylage. You can see this headed out grass plant here, longer chop. Grass is notoriously a bit harder to get compacted, especially when it's longer chop and like this. So when that happens, boy, we've got to be feeding it out quickly enough so that we're not getting any surface mold. So keep an eye on the surface as well. Make sure we don't have any visible mold coming that, again, not only is it robbing nutrients that would have been available to the rumen microbes, it's also potentially causing cow health problems as well. If we do have spoilage, we want to get it off. And here we got a hardworking guy, and look at this job that he's doing. He's removing all that spoilage. This is likely a bunker that had been in place for quite a long time. You see some old weed growth here, more active weeds here. So probably some damaged plastic that's led to this extra spoilage. So again, thank you, buddy, for getting that job done. But this is an issue. This is a safety issue. What we need to have here, to make this a safer operation, is there needs to be a big loader bucket right here. That's a safety valve, basically, for this individual. Another approach that I've seen on some dairies is picture a great big concrete block on either side of this big drive-over pile, and now a cable going between these two concrete blocks, and this guy having a safety harness on and an attachment going to this cable. So now he can easily move along this whole length of the bunker, and if he were to fall, he only falls a very short distance and he's safe. So that is another approach that can be done. I would do that one along with that loader bucket, just for added safety. The final one is, what the heck can I do with my management so I don't have this much spoilage? And here I would say this is too steep. So this is going to be a challenge to get it packed adequately on this drive-over pile. And there's likely, as I mentioned, some plastic damage here, which is increasing spoilage as well. So we have a poll question here for you. Thinking about your bunkers, or if you're a consultant, those that you work with there, we remove plastic from our bunker silos on a daily basis, or do you do it 2 times per week? Do you do it once a week? Do you do it once a month? Or what's that plastic stuff anyway? So just take a moment, please, and
Well,
that's what we're doing.
Mike?
Yes, sir. I got my vote.
Yeah.
You tell me you got your vote in your mind.
We have bags at Dairyman Farms, so I will let you answer for us this time.
I'm going to go. Ideally, daily would be ideal, but I don't think many dairymen can do that. So I'm gonna vote twice a week.
Okay. Let's see how it is. The voting's pretty brisk. We're over half voted now, moving right on up there, and we'll see what our participants say.
The really neat thing is Steve, a number of the farms can now get plastic picked up on the farm. So,
Yeah.
what do you think, Bill?
Okay, so we got almost a third of our participants taking it off on a daily basis. So that's going to be best for the cow. Probably no question about it. You just got to think through: is it the best use of my time there? And there's going to be times when you need to do that. If you've gone, for example, twice per week, and if you went to twice per week and you started to see spoilage, you had to go back to once per day, I'll go along with that. Twice per week, I'd agree with Dr. Hutchins. That's probably most widely used. And again, it's usually adequate that we can keep ahead of any bad spoilage. The only thing to watch there, if you do it twice per week, they actually use up to that point where you removed it last time. If you constantly remove too much plastic, so even though you do it 2 times per week, it still gets to be more than 3 to 4 days old. It's 5 or 6 days old because you took off too much plastic. Then that's an issue. So try to keep that amount, obviously, that you're rolling back plastic-wise, the proper amount. Weekly, again, that's okay. The only thing I'd say, make sure you're going up there and looking at that carefully there on day 6, day 7, digging down into that pile. What's that top surface of that forage like? Take some temperatures. Is it higher than, or much higher than back underneath the plastic? And if it is, especially more than 10 degrees, I'll give it as your limit, then I would look at, can we reorganize some labor and do it more frequently? Monthly, and what the heck is plastic? We don't want to go there. Of course, we're going to use it.
Bill, how about Steve Larson here quickly? Seasonal differences, can we do it less frequently in the winter months, for example?
Yeah, Steve, so wintertime or natural refrigeration, can we get by with less in the winter? And Spoilage-wise, I will say yes. If we end up getting, let's say, a bunch of ice and snow on top of it, it's maybe a little bit more we have to work with there. But spoilage-wise, we potentially could stretch it out more during those cold months, and it's not going to spoil. So that's a good question, Steve, and that can be done.
Thanks.
Okay, now I want to talk some about a really important area, and that's, if we look at this big bunker silo here, there's variation across that bunker. The dry matter here in this upper part of the bunker is different than in the middle. It's different than over here. The fiber levels, the fermentation profiles, they vary across that bunker. For that reason, what we really want to do after we deface, if it's with a defacer like on this dairy, or if it's scraped to the loader bucket, we want to make sure we're going to be taking all that variation that's going on across that bunker and minimizing it by mixing all of that forage together, okay? And here we see a dairy that's doing that. This silage has been defaced. This feeder's picking up that silage. He's dumping it. He's going to do that from both directions repeatedly here. And that's going to be a silage that now is uniform, so that now when these loads of feed are made, much more uniform, and it will make for a more consistent diet. I'll say another way this can be done is, let's say our bunkers are quite a ways away from our loading area. You can actually put that forage in the mixer wagon, mix it for a couple of minutes, bring it over right next to the loading area, discharge it. That's another good way to get these forages pre-mixed prior to making our loads of feed. One other point here, this is where your samples are taken for dry matter or for analysis. Okay, so this is this uniform representation of this entire face of our bunker. That's where we want to be getting our sample for analysis or for dry matter. You do not want to be walking along here grabbing little grab samples and trying to mix that together for your analysis. Another, to me, critical area. We want to make sure we're properly sampling for analysis or for dry matter. So that's from a completely mixed, everything mixed across this whole face from our bunker. Okay, monitoring and adjusting dry matters, another very important area. And I want to start out here first with an example of a dairy that was feeding 2 haylage, first cutting here in blue, third cutting alfalfa in red, and this is their corn silage down here in green. And this first cutting, you can see it's pretty much around this 46, 47%, and see some dips here on this daily basis. And boy, there's a big dip. Went from 45% down to 36%, then it's 40-40. When you're taking dry matters on your dairy, and let's say things have been pretty darn steady here within a couple of points here, the next day you come in and it's 36%. If it's been a beautiful night, boy, the stars were out last night, now the sun's up in the morning, nice pleasant temperature, it's a big bunker silo, there's absolutely no reason that we had this great big drop in dry matter. And if that's the situation, you resample it and recheck it and find out what's going on there. On the other hand, if we had 2 inches of rain last night and it was a blowing rain and it was packing and pelting that bunker face, this is entirely possible. That is completely true. And you look how this happened 3 days in a row. That was a change in dry matter. It likely was a very wet time period right there. We went through that and boom, things are back where they should have been, okay, where they were. That's how I would look at these dry matters when you see a big change. It's kind of a repeat of that again over here. Those are likely weather related. We should take those changes. If there's nothing weather related that would have led to that big change, then we need to retest that sample and make sure it's right. Another thing I like to do, have farms do, when they submit a sample for laboratory analysis, split that sample and half of it, or the part that you kept on the farm, check your own dry matter and compare that to the lab. So that's what we see here. This is the lab dry matter for this first cutting. It's over here, and here it is, and there it is. You can notice they're all a little bit lower, with the exception of this bad guy here. Of course, he went the other direction. We look at the haylage, or the third cutting, and it's maybe a little bit closer than what the first was. Corn silage is pretty much right on the money, lab and farm measurements. That's important because sometimes we have a regular, consistent bias in our farm measurement, and we want to correct that for the lab measurement, which we're going to view as the correct measurement. Okay, so we want to watch for a consistent bias like that, and if it exists, we want to correct it. The last thing I'd say here is, with these, if you did a daily dry matter, would you change it to that exact dry matter every day? And again, if there's a weather event, I would take that into account. No weather event, I would use a bit of a rolling average here for the last few days and averaging those dry matters, and that's going to be really, really close to what the cows are actually seeing. So with dry matter, again, as I mentioned, you'd want to compare your dairy results with your lab results. How often does it need to be done? Does it really change daily? Well, it really shouldn't. One thing I like about daily is it becomes a regular protocol. It can be done so that it is efficient. This dairy has multiple vortex. It's a combination vortex and Coster tester. So multiple dryers, they can set those up, and it's happening as the forages, as the feeder's doing some initial feeding, can get these results back and act on them. We also, of course, have these NIR sensors, which have been on the market now for a few years, and they are doing better now. A recent ADSA abstract looking at this NIR sensor in particular, as long as it was corrected for bias, and there was some bias there on the dairy, correct for that bias, and it was really right on the money, the same numbers as what were achieved with other means of measuring dry matters. So this obviously is a very important area. We want to make sure it's being done properly. Well, there's a whole bunch of other things that are very important in terms of this consistent TMR and getting the most out of your ration. And my colleague, Dr. Tom Olberg, actually addressed these in another Forage Dairyman webinar that I'll refer you to, and go ahead and listen to that. So we're going to assume here that our TMR has been properly prepared and it's delivered, and we're going to go on from there. We've got, of course, changes in pen counts and changes in intakes happening on our dairy on a daily basis. And I want to just think through with you some ways that we can adjust for those changes. First of all, everybody should know what their intakes are for their cows. If you're a larger dairy, you most likely have an electronic feed management system to help you take care of your feeding system. If you don't have one of these, you can still get dry matter intakes. Okay, you got to put some more effort into it, but you still can and should do that. No excuse not to have accurate dry matter intake. And of course, we're monitoring intakes in all of our pens. This is a dairy that has one of these electronic feed management systems, and they're doing a lot of the other things that I mentioned here to try to minimize this variation. So it's a 320 cow group making just under 100 pounds of 3/6 fat milk. They were giving BST at this time to half the cows in the pen that were eligible. They'd give half the cows one week and the other half the next week. Okay, they're on a 14-day injection interval, but they did it only to half the number of animals in the pen just to try to reduce this. This is a little BST swing. You can see it happen even with a 7-day cycle. There's still a little swing there. And that would be a greater swing, of course, if all the cows were getting it on the same day. Well, they also did daily dry matters of their forages. They pre-mixed those forages prior to feeding. They really worked to reduce sorting. And one final thing, very critical part here, excellent communication between our cow management staff and the feed management staff. Feeders have to know, are cows moving today? Okay, how many cows are leaving pen 4 and going into pen 8, for example, or vice versa? What's going to be happening so that that feeder can properly be feeding that pen of cows? Now, this dairy has only a 0.75% or refusal goal. And then they would adjust that feeding rate by about 1/2 pound dry matter per cow if they were beyond that goal. So let's see how they did here. Here's their intakes, and you can see they're pretty darn steady, okay? Intakes should not vary. You shouldn't go from 55 pounds, for example, to 62 pounds, and then back down to 57 pounds. Intakes in a group should be very steady. When you've got great big swings, What that means is we got some issues with our feeding program. We're feeding forages, for example, where these dry matters are different than what we thought they should be. That's a really big one. We might not be distributing feed properly there in the along the bunk for the cows. We might have pen numbers that aren't being sent properly from the cow managers to the feed managers. But this is how steady our intakes should be. Now, what about that low refusal level? Remember, their goal is right here about 0.75%. And you can see on most of these days, they're about there, about 0.5%. These days, that was essentially nothing left, okay, 0%. Let's go ahead a slide. Anytime that with our cows, of course, we want that feed to be well distributed and available to all cows. We can have 6% refusals. If those refusals are in one area of the bunk, we got an empty bunk, right? We don't have feed available to our cows. This is 0.75%. This is just before it's going to be scraped up and fed to the cows. And again, it's along the whole length of this bunk. That's really critical. Also, you can think about where cows really like to eat. If you notice areas, for example, on either end of these pens, often is where they are, where cows consume a lot more feed. Well, we want to be delivering more feed to those areas as well. We want to make sure that the device that we use to push up feed enables us to move feed around some so that if we are running low on one part of the bunk, we can take care of that problem. Well, this is the refusal from that pen. Again, it's only about 0.5 to 0.75%. And that's good looking TMR. That's what it should be, okay? We can't feed cows, for example, 2% spoiled feed from the top of a bunker and try to have a 1% goal for refusal. We got to feed them only good feed. We have to kind of minimize sorting as much as possible. That's what's being done here. So with this low refusal level, that's still a really good TMR. That's what we want that to look like. Okay, so I just want to give you some ideas in that area. This is another really, really interesting one, delivering that TMR. Some interesting research done here. This is the amazing effect of timing of feed delivery. Some good work done up here by Trevor DeFries and King and Crosley, where you want to make some easy money. This is like a secret, you guys. Hey, you want to make some easy money? Here it is. Ready? Feed cows between milkings rather than at milking. So in this research study, cows were milked 3 times and they're fed 2 times, either at milking time, for both of these feedings, or between milking time. Now, cows fed between milking, they ate less feed. They only ate 58.5 pounds when they're fed between milkings versus when they're fed at milking, they ate 60 pounds. They didn't eat as much feed. So is that a concern? Well, let's keep going here. Cows that were fed between milkings ate more slowly. They ate 0.26 pounds per minute versus 0.29 pounds when they're fed at milking. Well, you know what? If you eat more slowly, that could be a good thing because we've got saliva flow that occurs when cows are eating feed. So they're going to eat, maybe, have some more saliva flow as they're eating a little bit more slowly there. That can be good. Well, they had cows that were fed between milkings, they had more frequent and smaller sized meals. So they had 10 meals versus 9 meals. Well, that's actually a good thing, isn't it? More meals, that means smaller carbohydrates, less carbohydrates being ingested at a given time. That could be a more stable rumen pH. And look at this. They made the same amount of milk. Numerically, it was actually more, 106.3 pounds versus 105.7 when they're fed at milking. On an energy-corrected milk dry matter intake basis, that ratio there, it increased from 1.79 when they're fed at milking to 1.93 when they're fed between milking. Now, Dr. Hutchins, he's cringing right now. He's like 1.93, that's eeks out. That might be losing body condition. But you know the other thing that can be from? A really efficient rumen fermentation. If that fermentation isn't as efficient, so let's say that we had a bigger meal with a bigger drop in rumen pH, those rumen microbes, especially the fiber fermenters, they're really sensitive to drops in pH. So now that happened more here with these bigger, fed at milking, right? Eat a little faster, bigger meal. So they don't ferment things as efficiently. They don't get as much out of the diet. Versus here, I'm going to say that's from a more efficient fermentation. Cows could extract more nutrients from those same feedstuffs. They could actually, with a lesser amount of feed make at least as much milk. If we look at that on an income over feed cost basis, that's 26 cents more money available simply by changing that feeding time. That's pretty neat. Now, this is a small study, not a lot of cows, but the exciting thing is we're seeing the same effect in the field. Okay, so this is real, you guys, and it's, again, easy thing to do. It's going to take some management changes on your dairy if you're not doing it, but it can be a real benefit. Okay, next area, no sorting allowed. Well, essentially, I've got all here, and you know, it's always in biology. You want to be a little careful with all, but let's say all. All nutritional issues can be related to sorting. So we got a poll here. The straw or dry hay for our pre-fresh cows, straw or dry hay for our pre-fresh cows, and I want you to be thinking about it's your ration on your herd, or if you're a consultant, it's what you're recommending there to your clients. 33% or more of that straw is on the top screen when I run it through the Penn State particle separator. So 33% or more is on the top screen, and most of that that's on that top screen is more than 4 inches long. Or is there less than a third on the top screen, and what is on the top screen is essentially all less than 2 inches long? Or it's not measured. Straw or hay for pre-fresh cows is not measured. Or my nutritionist keeps an eye on it. I'm counting on that guy to make sure it's right, guy or gal. Or we don't feed straw or dry hay. So what do you think?
Very interesting, Mike. How do you look at this one? The safe answer for me is I hope that our nutritionist is keeping an eye on it, but that leaves the top two choices up for grabs. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we want to go the second choice, less than 33% of top screen, and you might even want to make that 1 inch instead of 2 inches, because those crooks of Wisconsin said those cows can sort that stuff that are around 2 inches. So I'd go there. In fact, we got one at our AAB conference that came in from the field, and it meets that requirement. There's nothing over an inch on the top screen.
Okay, very good. And the voting is moving right along here. While we're waiting for the voting to close, Bill, on the previous discussion, feeding at milking, would that mean then when the cows are in the holding pen, basically away from the bunk, that's what you would feed, as opposed to feeding when they're back in their pen?
That's correct, yep. Steve.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. Yeah, great. Okay.
Okay, and here are our poll results. We've got, we'll start with the big one. 61%, they went along with that Dr. Hutchins guy, less than a third on the top screen. And we got mostly 2 inches or less. 1 inch, I can go with that, Mike. So first of all, this is the answer. I go with that one, okay? The 1 inch, the shorter it gets, the harder it is to sort. And the big thing we don't want, I think 2 inches can still work. I also like to add some sticky feeds to my pre-fresh diets that are like this. That also helps so we can get by with a little bit longer. So part of that depends on the characteristics of the diet. If you don't have that available to you, adding particularly some stickier feeds, then that 1 inch would be a bigger deal. This one, if we're getting up there to 4 inches, a lot of that's 4 inches there on the top screen, they're going to sort that. So that's going to cause some problems. Is not measured, hopefully that means that your nutritionist keeps an eye on it. That one can work as long as that individual is out there often enough to really be watching it. If your nutritionist is there every 2 weeks, let's say, well, that could be a lot of days there where something could be off, and there could be problems because of that. So we don't feed straw, dry hay. That's another approach, right? We could have chopped forages. We could have grass haylage. That's low potassium grass haylage, and that's for our pre-fresh cows, and that can certainly work as well. So thank you everyone for participating there. This is some straw that was screened out by my colleague Mark Tegler on a recent visit. He's a University of Illinois graduate, and that's why he had to use this pen right here. But this is what that straw looked like on that top screen. We got 27% or 46.5 or 26.6. Again, here's my rough goal here, about 1/3 on each. Ideally, all those long particles are less than 2 inches. And 2 inches on this pen, it's about right here. So if we look for particles here that are longer than 2, that guy's there, and this guy's longer, and maybe this one, but most of them are less than 2 inches, okay? We don't want it to be looking like this. This is a diet designed for sorting, and we're going to have cows eating multiple diets here. There's going to be problems there. So that needs to be processed better. Now, the best person probably to be doing that check on particle size is the guy who's running the straw processor. That way, he can't say when that nutritionist might come by that, oh, by the way, your straw's not chopped adequately. And then typically what happens is, oh, really? Geez, that surprises me. Well, if it's set up with the protocol that that individual has to check that particle size, then there shouldn't be any excuse for it, right? That's part of his job to make sure it's chopped properly. I would consider doing it that way. This is a really interesting study done by Lou Armentaro and Leonardi. And we've got, each of these points here is a different cow. And this is looking at how much sorting that individual cow did. This Y1 through Y5, these are the longest particles and a little bit shorter, etc. These are the finest particles and the next shortest particles, okay? So if we look at this cow right here, for example, this is a cow who doesn't want to do anything wrong. She's doing her best to be a good girl out there in her pen, and she's not going to sort it all, and she's going to eat everything just exactly the way she's supposed to. But there aren't many cows like that. Most of them are like, if I can get away with it, I'm going to do it, okay? So here's this cow sorting against and it's usually the longer particles that are sorted against most, and we see that here. So they're not consuming as much as they theoretically should be for these longer particles, and they're preferentially eating more of the fines. So more of the grain, less of the forage, and you can see the vast majority of cows are doing that. This is the reason when you walk through a group of cows that manure can look different. Manure can look different because cows are eating different diets, varying amounts of forage versus concentrate there, and that's influencing what that manure would look like. So we want to do things on our dairy so that everyone's going to be a lot more like this. And these cows that really want to sort, guess what? Sorry, girls, you can't. That's our goal. So first of all, know how much sorting is occurring in your dairy and work to minimize it. Our particle size differences between the TMR and the refusal can be less than a 5 percentage point difference. So that's our goal. We want to have less on the top screen of that Penn State particle separator, more in the middle. That will help to hold things together. So some guidelines there, about 48% on the top screen, 55% on the top 2 screens of the Penn State particle separator. We can add liquids to reduce TMR dry matter. Stickier liquids like molasses and whey work better than water. I like to add enough to minimize sorting, again, to these goals up here. That's usually about 43 to 46% dry matter in a silage-based diets. And finally, we got to keep that feed pushed up. Got a good pile of feed there in front of the cows. That makes it more difficult for them to sort it as opposed to just having a small amount in front of them. These are we got 4 different examples, 3 different herds here. And these first 2 herds, this is looking at the TMR, what's been fed, in the amount on the top screen of the Penn State particle separator. This is the amount in the refusal for the top. And you can see very similar. The same thing for the middle, the same thing for the pan. I want to point out that's with a really low refusal level, 2% and 1%. And these diets are within, at the most, 1.5 percentage points about on all of them, okay? So we've got stickier whey in the first herd. We've got whey and molasses being added on the farm in the second example, and they are not sorting. Now we look at this other herd, we see there's a longer particle size, more in the top screen to begin with. There's a heck of a lot more in the refusal. Same thing with our middle screen. Not with the pan, right? There's less there in the pan. They're preferentially eating that grain. They're leaving the longer fiber particles. Same amount of ort, nothing there to sticking it together, and we've got more long material there. Okay, so this is an example. This herd, we need to add some liquids ideally some stickier feeds to take care of this problem. Potentially, you should be able to have 11% on your top screen and not have sorting, okay? But when you see something like this, you need to take some action there. Okay, targeting body condition score at freshening. We don't want animals to be overconditioned, especially at freshening. So here's this really nice looking cow here. She's coming into freshening. You can see just some nice condition here over her short ribs, over her dorsal processes here. Her hooks and her pins are just covered. So this cow would be fine for coming into freshening. You can see this individual here. It's keeping very careful attention to what's going on. Do I need to do anything? And he's also thinking, where's the pie? Where's the pie there? I'm going to go and make sure that I get some. But doing a great job with that cow there. Now, monitoring body condition scores, that can be done either by the consultant or by personnel on the dairy. But the advantage with the consultant, it's one score. And so that individual can quickly do it. It's very consistent and efficient that way. Disadvantage is when that nutritional consultant is walking through a group of cows, they don't know how long a cow's been there. And so they've got to either look that up or just assume, well, I think she's going to be my average type cow. They also don't know when they leave. That's a disadvantage. Dairy personnel can do it at key times. Those individuals, to do those body condition scores, they have to be right in sync with the consultant for that dairy. So those scores are exactly the same, so that consultant is confident in using those scores. They can be done at key times. For example, when dry far cows move to the pre-fresh group, or at 90 days pregnancy confirmation. Our goal is in that 3¼ to 3.5 range. That's where we want them to be. I want to spend some time right here. Usually our problem with lactating cows is getting too much body condition on them. There's a maintenance diet approach for lactating cows which can help to keep production up but not put on body condition. Our dry cows, of course, I'm not going to spend time on this, but that's why we feed controlled energy diets. We don't want them to be putting on body condition. So let's spend some time on these maintenance diets. Now that came from the Mike Allen group, Alan Bradford and Oba here, the hepatic oxidation theory, these maintenance diets in later lactation cows. And basically what's happening in these cows, rumen fill isn't limiting intake anymore in this later lactation cow. She's going down in milk production, and with that, her glucose demand is also decreasing. Her natural BST, somatotropin levels, are decreasing, right with that decreasing production. At the same time now, her adipose tissue is becoming more sensitive to insulin, which means more excess energy can be driven to adipose tissue if there is this excess energy there. A ruminal propionate spike or rise could result in a spike or a rise in blood glucose, which leads to an increase in insulin, which could direct nutrients away from the udder into the adipose. Now, this is where I need to have you guys paying attention and thinking here, because this is our most stringent biology here. Here's two diets. We've got a high starch and a low starch diet. So low starch 21, high starch 31. And we're looking at blood glucose levels here. Here's blood glucose. Again, that starch is coming into the rumen. Rumen microbes are fermenting it to propionate. That propionate's going to the liver, being made into glucose. We also have starch that's making it to the small intestine. That in the small intestine, it's going to glucose there as well. So look at that. That higher starch level has higher blood glucose than the low starch level. Now that cow senses that, and she puts out, high starch level puts out more insulin. Okay, that insulin, remember, its job is to store nutrients. It doesn't say send nutrients to the udder. It says send them to adipose, store that energy. And so with this high starch diet, with this rise in propionate, and especially a propionate spike, we can be directing more nutrients to adipose and less to the udder and less to production. We want to avoid that. We can avoid that in these later lactation cows that are putting on body conditions by reducing for sure any propionate spike, and we can reduce their propionate level. We do that by reducing starch levels. Any reduction will help. I usually look at around 20 to 24% of the ration dry matter starch for these cows. We might substitute some dry corn for high moisture shell corn. That would help with this spike in particular, but also the overall level. If we decrease starch, we don't want to lose milk. We're going to bring in good digestible fermentable fiber. So some feeds like soy hulls or beet pulp or citrus pulp. And we're substituting those for our starch feeds like high moisture shell corn or cornmeal. We can further lower starch by substituting some haylage for corn silage. But all the time, we're keeping track of how much metabolizable energy and metabolizable protein will this new diet of mine support, because I don't want to lose milk, and we don't. But what we're going to do, we're going to direct those nutrients more to the udder and less to adipose. If there is any milk fat depression, we want to also make sure we take care of that, because that also will direct nutrients to adipose versus to the udder. Finally, getting more of the ration, we want to, first of all, do no harm, as Hippocrates reminded physicians many hundreds of years ago. First of all, do no harm. We want to be thinking about that out on our dairies. So that's our job as dairy managers, our jobs as veterinarians. We're doing our best to take the best care of our cows, and again, not doing harm. Here's a group of individuals. These are first lactation. These are heifers. They just came back from being milked. There's fresh feed that's been delivered. You know, maybe not what we'd recommend based on our earlier discussion, but fresh feed's been delivered. These guys are waiting for them. As soon as that last heifer got there, they're going to work. They're checking for any metritis. They're checking temps. They're doing some infusion here if she needs it. And those heifers are like, ugh, here they come. You know, this is going to be bad. I'm not going to eat as much as I would have otherwise. And this dairy had some more metritis than what they should have. And so they made some changes. They tried to watch animals from over here, see who really wasn't eating, who's eating well. I'm going to target who I examine. We're not going to, you know, we're going to give them more time to eat, because intake is so important. So again, first of all, do no harm. I want you to think about time budgets on your dairy. We have everything that we have to get done throughout the day. We only have so much time to do it. Same thing with our cows. They only have so much time. So they got to eat, right? Normal range 3.5 to 5 hours. We're going to use 5 hours in our example here. They've got to drink around half an hour per day. They like to socialize, walk around that pen some, see what the other cows are doing there. So let's say it's around 3 hours. We add that up, that's 8.5 hours, okay? We want our cows lying down comfortably in their stalls for ideally at least 12 hours. Our elite cows, those cows making the most milk, they typically got things figured out. For example, getting milk first, getting back and eating, getting back to that good stall. They got to figure it out so they get even more rest time. But we want at least 12 hours. So if we take our 8.5 hours here and our 12 hours here, we add that up, that's 20.5 hours. That means we got 3.5 hours to get cows milked, to get them back to the pens, to take care of any work we need to do in terms of AI or synchronization shots or BST shots or vet check days. And you know what? Check it out on your dairy, because I bet there's going to be times when it's quite a bit more than that. When we exceed that level, and now we cut into rest time, for every hour that we cut into rest time, we're going to lose 2 to 3 pounds per milk for every hour of rest that we lose. And that's short-term milk. It's not long-term milk from things like increased lameness or laminitis in these cows here. Okay, so look at how much time that these different intervention activities are taking on your dairy, and look at ways to correcting them if it's too long. So I want you to think about all of these areas on your operation or with the dairies that you work with, and work to design and implement protocols that address these areas, that take care of them so they're not a problem, so that your cows can achieve the production levels and have the health that we want them to have and that they deserve, and sit back there and reap the rewards. That's our goal. So thank you very much. This is the Finger Lakes of New York in the fall, so we're heading to this beautiful time. I'd be very happy to take any questions that you have at this time.
Okay, well, Bill, great job. Lots of practical information. You covered a lot of ground, and I'm sure you gave everybody plenty to think about. We had a really good audience with us. If this had been a meeting room, I think we might have had to set up some extra chairs. So that's great. Well, thanks again to you then, and also to Kuhn for their support of the webinar. And let's look ahead. Let's roll back one time to the next webinars. Yeah. Mike and Mike show is coming up October 9th. Mike Rankin from Hay and Forage Grower Magazine, and Mike Hutchins, our co-host and partner in this event, going to tell us what the feed looks like and that we've harvested it this year and what to expect in some feed prices and so forth in the months ahead. Zinpro will be sponsoring, and then looking a bit further ahead, QLF will be sponsoring our November 13 webinar. Dave Barbano, Cornell University, well-known dairy scientist, will be talking about how we can use milk fatty acid analysis to keep ourselves on target nutritionally and physiologically for the cows in our herds. Then a quick word of thanks again to Mike Hutchins for his participation in our series, as well as his partner Jim Baltz down there at the University of Illinois. Those of you who were with us today will be receiving a survey here in a couple of days. We appreciate your response on that. Just takes a few seconds to do that. And so we appreciate your help on that to keep us focused in the right direction on our webinar series. And with those comments, Mike, are there some questions there, Mike Hutchins?
Yes, we do have some questions, Bill, if you're ready. One listener was wondering about that dry matter intake variation. What's acceptable if the dry matter, let's say, is 50 pounds, that's the baseline. How much variation can you accept before you get concerned, plus or minus that 50 pounds or whatever number you want to use?
Sure. Well, keep in mind the things that I showed there. For example, with BST, if you had a whole group on BST, and let's say in your high group there you had 70% of those cows on BST, near the end there can be a several pound swing in intake. So let's take that one out of the equation and say that we're not doing it, or if we were splitting the group like I showed. Then, boy, 2 pounds. 2 pounds is actually a lot. It shouldn't be changing like that. If it does change, I'd be looking at first huge one. Am I mixing my forages properly for feeding, getting that totally mixed up so it's totally representative of what's out there in that silo? And then are my dry matters right on the money? Okay, so the only other one would be, do I have big environmental extremes? So we did have a big heat wave that came through, for example, or a big cold wave. We've got more freezing around water troughs, things like that. But those intakes, when everything is being done correctly, they should be very stable.
Okay, another question. Read in a California study that over 50% of those farms did not discard spoilage. Too much labor to remove it. Any pointers on how to get this done without hand labor?
Yeah, so lots of farms not throwing away the spoilage, and that's that might even be increasing with, OSHA is on our dairy farms. OSHA is making sure we're doing things safely. No problem with that. But some producers have just said, well, I'm going to eliminate that as a potential risk. I'm not going to have guys up there. The big key and first big absolute important key is, what steps can I put in place so I don't have that spoilage? Okay, that's proper silage management. That's getting the upper part of the silo really well packed. It's covering it as soon as we're done filling. I like to use oxygen limiting plastic first, and then a white on double layer plastic after that, white on black type plastic. We're going to have lots of our tires on top of that pile, have that leading edge totally sealed in as I showed. We could take one step further. We could use an inoculant, for example, an L-buchneri inoculant that would produce some more acetate and propionate through that fermentation, which would help to give us more bunk life, including on top of that pile. And the final one, if you didn't take that approach, it could be some propionic acid that was put on, add in siling. Some people do it just near the end, that last day when they're filling, putting on more prop there on top to have some more preservative there as well. So that's what I'd be looking at. If I did have spoilage, I'd be thinking through how can I safely remove that and efficiently and still get it off of there.
Okay, we got a question from Pakistan. What is the best time for feed delivery? Going back to the earlier comment that Steve was asking about, they are delivering 1/2 hour before milking. What is that time in the Canadian study? Do you have a recommendation?
Sure. So the issue with 1/2 hour before milking is you got some cows that are going to want to eat more than half an hour. And I could see that guy bringing the cows to the parlor has got to be like getting cows away from the feed bunk. So that would be too close to feeding time. Really, in that Canadian study, it was pretty much right at the midpoint between milkings. So, you know, it's right in that 3.5 to 4 hours after they got back that they were fed. Now, the one thing I want to put out there is when those cows come back from being milked, you want to make sure there's plenty of feed there yet, right? We don't want to have it so that there's not feed there. But that's how it was done in that Canadian study, right at the midpoint, and that's how I would try to be looking at that.
Okay, we've had several questions related to that. When you monitor, another question is when you monitor dry matter intake, is it just the orts that you're most concerned about? I think that's the question on the orts level and its effect on dry matter intake.
Okay, so the orts level and effect on dry matter intake. So first, those really low refusal levels I showed, those were for really good, stable, high or later lactation groups. Your fresh group, your pre-fresh group, we've got real variation in animal numbers there. We need to have greater amounts of refusals there. There I'd be shooting for at least 5% because we've got big movement there in animal numbers and in their days of milk relative to calving. Later on, we can get tighter, like I showed. That's kind of up to you as a dairy producer. How tight do I want to be? And it comes down to, in my mind, how tight a ship am I gonna run here on my operation? And the example I wanted to make is that you really can go that low. If you're higher, we want to be thinking about what do I do with that refusal? And of course, if it's still good feed, we can feed it to later lactation groups. We can make good use of it. We want to be careful if we were to feed it to heifer groups. We've seen lots of examples of producers that fed lactating refusals to young heifers, and it's a Johne's inoculation tool. So we get manure contamination coming from the mature cows. It goes to a young heifer, and that's a problem with Johne's disease. So that's a caution I put out there. In terms of feeding it to older heifers, there's still that risk of Johne's. The other one is it's too much energy typically for older heifers. It's easy to get them too fat. So that's typically why we're trying to minimize our refusal levels is it's just where best do we go with it.
Another quick question has to do with forcibly getting the cows to get up and make them go to the feed bunk to try to increase dry matter intake. Is that would you recommend that if cows are sluggish coming back to the feed bunk or just staying in the cubicle too long? Comments?
Well, you shouldn't have to force them to go to eat. I'd be looking at why in the heck don't they want to go and eat? You know, it might be that they're not making much milk. If they don't have a drive from production to go and eat, then forcing them to go over to the bunk isn't going to do you really any good. I'd also really look at cow comfort. If we have poor cow comfort and the cow finally lays down and boy, she's just tired, she's been standing way too much. Now I don't want to get back up. I want to stay laying here. Cows that are making milk and we've got good TMR, we don't have to get them up to go and head to that bunk. So I'd be looking at other areas, other things that might be influencing that on that dairy.
Very good, Bill. I think several people sent greetings, and so we'll pass that along as well. And we had several questions about this timing in between the milking, and you've handled that very well. So, Steve, we'll turn it back to you to
Okay, wrapping up here. Again, Bill, thank you very much. Excellent job. Great audience out there with us today. Thanks to Kuhn for their support, and thanks to our partners, Mike Hutchins and Jim Baltz down at the University of Illinois. And we'll be signing off here from Fort Atkinson for this month's webinar, and looking forward to having you join us on October 9th when we'll be talking about how the forage from this harvest season looks and what might be ahead for the feed supply situation. So hope to have you with us on October 9th. That's it from Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Thank you very much.